Scott, are you getting audio?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. This headset sometimes is so noise canceling, it'll sound like it just totally disconnected.
Am I muted?
There you go. Now we got you.
There you go. Can you tell I'm a financial guy and not a tech guy yet?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the feeling.
Oh my.
I work in healthcare, and when I started all this, I struggled. I don't know if you've ever worked with anyone from the healthcare world, but we're all terrible at technology.
Yeah, it's everybody has their own language, and this one is incredible. Hi, Scott.
Hey,
Read a lot of your stuff. Thanks for everything you're doing. The crypto winter's been hard on everybody,
Indeed.
especially
sure.
us farmers, huh?
For sure. I think that's just, I think a lot of times though, it's easy to lose perspective, because if you look at the big picture of things, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but I feel like TFT's lost a lot less value in the last year than Ethereum and Bitcoin have percentage wise. Maybe we're down, but I think it's nice to see that we came down in a more stable fashion than most coins did, and I think we still have a lot of activity. So
Sure. Well, the way I handle it is I tell my wife and others that that price is meaningless
right,
because number one, it's measured in dollars, which
exactly.
are so overvalued because of the lack of knowledge out there. Once that bubble cracks, forget it.
Well,
Uh,
it always entertains me, because I think a lot of the times the feedback we get on like people's fears with crypto, they're like, oh, well, it changes value every day. And I'm like, if you only knew how much your dollar has fallen, how much of a dollar winter we are also in right now.
right, right.
Because everyone focuses on, seeing the percentage points on crypto because it's out there in front of us and everything's decentralized. So everybody has the information, and they don't realize that that's actually a benefit, and that we just don't know those things about the real world economies.
Okay. Well, I'm the guy that wrote to you a couple months ago and told you about my grandson and the farm in Virginia.
You're Michael's father.
Yeah, Michael's father. And
Oh, okay.
his son Owen, I have two or three machines down there, and one of them I can't get running. And it's a BIOS thing or something. I've tried everything. But I don't go there that often. So I keep saying the next time I get down there, but usually I go down for hockey tournaments, and there's never any time. If you go away, if you're traveling around, well, anyway, it's my problem. But I want to get. He's 11. He's very interested. He's studying Python. So I wish I was 11 years old and studying Python. But I think it'll be well worth his education to keep him in this. I'm
Yeah, for
also. I
sure.
think I wrote to you, Scott, about the Lightning Network. Is there any way to make the farmers like a dual capacity? Like, is it? I know it messes with the TFT token a little bit, but is it? I think somebody wrote back and said you guys are thinking about it, but the Lightning Network seems to be growing very, very rapidly. And is there some way to integrate that into what we're trying to do with Threefold? Um, just a thought. I may be completely technologically off base, and it'll never work, and I don't understand it enough. But it seems to me like you know, it's a winning horse. We should try to integrate it somehow, some way.
That's a good question. I presume that Lightning nodes, I don't know too much about operating Lightning Network nodes, but I presume that they need some compute network storage capacity.
For sure.
I do know that for Lightning Network users, kind of everyone is relying on some kind of Sentinel, I think they call it, to basically see in the Lightning Network, because transactions are being settled off chain, there's a possibility that someone can try to cheat you, right? And then you submit your on-chain proof, and kind of you win, right? But so most people are relying on somebody else to perform this service for them, their wallet or whatever. So that's something like, those are two things, the nodes and then this Sentinel. If we could create those deployments for the grid, people could launch them for themselves.
The
So
other
I'm
thing I
looking,
thought was very interesting was the Mastodon project that you're working on to supply capacity to that social network.
yeah,
Where does that stand? I
so
rely
that's,
mostly on the app, the
yeah,
Threefold app for news,
okay.
and I haven't seen much on that in the app itself. But I know, Drew, that's one of your projects, right?
So I did a little bit of with Mastodon when we very first started on it, but there's a very in-depth actual Threefold project from Threefold Tech going on. I'll pull that up here a little bit. That is actually already to the point of beta testing. So it is actually, you can already actually go and deploy Mastodon servers on the grid. You can come here to the,
You can deploy. I'm not sure.
no,
I
actually,
read,
I well,
read through that stuff and my head exploded.
yeah, so this is actually far easier than the tutorials I wrote, because this is something that's actually been built into an applet.
Oh, okay.
So you come here to the Mastodon subdomain of threefold.io. You click on get started here.
Okay.
You go to get server, and this actually loads up the entire interface for deploying your Mastodon server here. All somebody has to do is put in their mnemonics here for their on-chain, for their deployment account, and then their SSH key. Let me stop sharing here because I don't have a way to copy that in without putting that up on the screen.
I don't even know what a mnemonic is. See, it's so easy to get stuck. And
so the mnemonic is your words
willing to
that are
learn.
associated with the wallets.
Okay.
So like when you set up your wallet, when you opened your Threefold Connect app for the first time, your mnemonics are the words that are kind of the accessibility for that wallet.
The secret phrase.
Yeah, it's the phrase.
Okay.
And
But
this
I was
interface,
told, don't ever type that in anywhere.
Well, this is something, I mean, you have to use that to deploy on the grid. That's how they identify your wallet to bill you.
Okay. So you're not taking any risks with that wallet.
No, this is actually a central function of the grid. That's how when someone comes on and they want to set up a VPS, right? So they want to deploy an Ubuntu VM that they can then host a website in. To do that, they create a twin that's associated with their phrase, and then that twin holds their funds. And whenever a deployment is made, the grid bills that twin so that it can take TFT out of that account and out of that wallet. This would be like typing in your wallet address into Lobster, not necessarily like as it would be like putting it into, sending it to somebody.
Okay.
So yeah, let's come back here. I got this pulled up.
also point out on this page, you can generate both the mnemonics and the SSH key. So, to the point about getting stuck, which I think is super valid. This is the first interface where you don't really need to come in with anything. If you don't have it, you can just click create and it'll give you a new one that you can fund. And this is a cool part of the grid right now too, is like, you don't have to have all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. So if you want to create a fresh account that you only use for Mastodon and you just fund it with as much TFT as you're comfortable having devoted to that deployment, then you can do that here. You can create a new account, you can fund it very easily from the TF Connect app.
Yeah, and something I really love about this
Yeah.
interface is this line here. Your deployment cost is $9 a month, USD. I think that's a huge improvement over what we've seen in the past of kind of figuring that out just from an hourly rate after the fact. Really, really cool there. But like he was saying, this button here creates a new phrase for you. This one creates a new SSH key, and then you can just scan this QR code from your Threefold Connect app that you've already set up and transfer
Right.
TFT to this account. And then only the TFT that you've set aside to fund your Mastodon deployment, is associated with the words you just created here. So that's something where, like, if you want to keep a whole different set of words for every deployment you have, so that if something gets compromised, it's not your whole wallet. That's something you can do here. But as you can see, all I did is paste in my phrase here.
Right.
And it gives me a per month cost up here in USD. So it's very upfront, very easy to use.
Yeah.
This actually, I didn't even have to type in my SSH key because I've associated this with my phrase on the playground, and I'm not sure how that worked, but it loaded it in automatically.
Oh, that's cool.
That's not something I've ever seen it do before. So I was kind of mind blown when I saw that happen. Fortunately, I was not recording because I was putting in my words, but and you can actually go from this point right here, click deploy, and you will have a functioning Mastodon server. Or you can come over here and you can like set your instance name, a little bit more functionality, or you can come all the way in here and you can go real deep, set everything up. It even has options to set up an SMTP server, which I'm interested in this. This is new too.
Now, can I pay for that in TFT or?
Yeah, so this bill's in TFT. So it's going to come directly out of your, your Threefold Connect. You're going to transfer that TFT you want to use from this for this deployment just by opening the Threefold Connect app, scanning this QR code here on your screen. And then you'll type in how much TFT you want to send to this wallet for this deployment if you just generated this, or you can use one you've already set up and funded.
Okay.
And then all those are just going to take out of that wallet. And, like if it runs out of funds, it pauses. So it'll take down your workload, but it doesn't delete it, which is really nice. I think you get, Scott, is it 14 days to refund your wallet? 2 weeks, yeah.
Yep.
So this is really a huge step in the grand scheme of things for deployment on the grid.
Yeah, that looks really good.
So we'll
Now,
actually go ahead. I'm just gonna.
One of the things I was hoping to do with this is to start sort of a family, a very private family social media server, if I'm using the right term.
Yeah.
Just a place where, starting with my grandson, he and I could communicate, and I know for sure it's not going anywhere other than him and I.
Yeah.
And then we would add family members as time went on. But I'd see a lot of advantages to private social networks. Even in business, you could have.
Yeah. So and that's something the grid really does offer a lot of. It's just
one of the unique kind of benefits is that, especially in the case that you're farming yourself, or you know a farmer that you trust, you can deploy onto their nodes. In this case, maybe Michael's nodes, right? And
yeah,
you would need a gateway to make those workloads public, unless you're using planetary network. And in this case, you could use Drew's nodes as your inbound gateway nodes, although still your traffic should be encrypted, so I don't think there's too much risk of being intercepted at that point. But then, yeah, any data is stored in a place that you trust, and you can have good access controls, strong passwords, and things like this for anyone that's logging in. And this is a far greater guarantee of privacy than you can get with any black box service, right? If you deploy with one of the major clouds, you just trust that they're doing what they say they will, and not using some kind of backdoors or monitoring. Like, it's total trust in their system. Whereas in this case, it's open source software running on hardware that's controlled by someone that you know and trust, or in the case of a business, they could deploy their own nodes. So yeah, we think this is, and it's once you start to understand this, it's really cool, because it's just something you can't get this level of certainty out of the traditional shared cloud environments.
Okay.
Yeah, I did want to tell you, Scott, the Michael that I believe is his son is not TF Michael that has like hundreds of nodes. His grandson's his grandson's a little guy, like 11 years old.
Just
Ah,
a
okay.
couple of
I
Dell servers, one of which is not working.
Yeah, we have another guy that came on the call a couple weeks ago. He's TF Michael on Telegram. He has like a farm with 123 nodes on it with it. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
like
not me. That's not us. Even with
um,
my brother, I think we have about 10. My brother went all in for a while. And then when the winter hit, he started to lose interest. I got to drag him back in.
yeah. So one of the things, I wanted to talk about a little bit is you're talking about setting up, a controlled environment basically, right? Where you guys could have your family, a Facebook basically, where you guys can share photos to each other and you can have all the features that you would have on Facebook, but you don't have to risk, Facebook owning that data now and who they're going to sell it to, who they're going to, advertise to with your data, all that stuff. And that's kind of the crux of the Threefold project as a whole. That decentralization is putting you back in control of your data, and something that is it's still a very new concept, but it's something that I'm seeing more and more discussion of is the digital twin, and the idea of that is that we're going to bring back so that you can have a structure where you host all of your data and you're in control of all of your data, but it's still accessible to everyone across the world when you want it to be. So that's kind of what you're talking about. And
Right.
deploying workloads and setting up these individual Mastodon sites is kind of a small piece of the puzzle. One of the things I think we often run into when we talk about setting up stuff on the grid and we talk about deploying on the grid is we get there's this cross of ideas because we talk about being a service similar to like AWS or a VPS host or something like that, where we make it easy for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good selling point. But we also have to talk about decentralization and the problems that come with that are inherent to being a decentralized service. So we are putting the control of your data 100% with you when we set things up like this. That also does take away some of those avenues where like AWS may be able to help you when you run into problems that we
Right.
may not, the grid can't do that because there's
Yeah.
nobody else that can access your data. I think
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes we run into a lot of people are saying, like, oh, we don't have a market ready product. They're saying we shouldn't do marketing because it's not ready for the everyday user. But they're failing to realize what our market really is, because we're setting up a service that provides compute, storage, and network. We're not setting up a service that makes, somebody who struggles with their iPhone a web designer. That's not a realistic product. So I think, but stuff like Mastodon, where that stuff has been put together and made into an easy deployable interface, and putting it into an applet like this makes it so that you can have the same benefits of being able to do that without having to fully understand the process.
Okay.
So then this is, as you've seen the background here, we're deploying it. I'll kind of just show you how easy this is. I ran into one small issue back there where we found, I think we just documented a bug for a report earlier because it said that there are no certified nodes on the grid, but and then when we turned that off, all the certified nodes showed up. So that was interesting.
I'm curious to know, kind of to bring it home, if Mastodon, because I don't have a lot of experience with Mastodon, is it an appropriate environment for hosting a private social network? I think it would be.
So it depends on how you set it up. So there is no federation inherent in the base Mastodon install. So you're not going to be, you for your post to be shared out to other Mastodons, like actively where you post it automatically shows up there. You would have to have a relay for those posts to get pushed there. Now, I don't know that you could really set up a truly private setup, right? Because it's going to be accessible at some level. But you can definitely have some privacy settings on individual profiles where people can't see photos and stuff like that, and you can control who registers on your instance. So
Yeah, I'm not worried at that level. I just want to fight back a little bit and try to own the data.
yeah, and that's and it really goes. Mastodon's one example of how that can be done.
Yeah.
Really, when we think about things, Mastodon is just a set of scripts essentially that puts together a web interface and installs the back end for you and just puts together all the basic tools of a website. and it just does it in a package for you. That's all Mastodon is.
That's interesting. Okay.
And what we are providing and what really makes this a unique product in the market and makes it a product that no one else can compete with is we are now providing that whole experience on a computer that's located, I just deployed this in Salzburg, which I believe, or I'm in Vienna. Yeah, that's Austria, right, Scott? I'm
Mhm.
showing off my Americanism. All right.
So it's okay. We just had Europeans in the chat saying they don't know anything about the different US states. So
Yeah, yeah,
you're vindicated.
yeah. I was man, I tell you what, the other day, I was starting on a project. I want to kind of set up like a set of VMs that encompasses all the major areas that we have like public IPs in right now, and set up like an interdispersory loop for planetary. And since we're not going to be after 3.8 deploys, I have some cool plans for like doing stuff with that. But anyways, with that being said, I was trying to figure out where all these places were, and I was like, oh boy, I don't know what country that city's in at all. It's like there's more than one of those.
For Green Edge, it's Switzerland, Austria, Germany,
Well, and
Canada.
I was
I think those are
surprised
all of them.
because originally I had thought that the farms that Green Edge had gateways in were all of the locations, but when I started looking just at what has public IPs available in there, where there's not necessarily gateways, I was actually really impressed because there's a whole lot more Green Edge than I thought there was. They
Yeah,
even
for
have
sure.
some North American sites even. I saw they've got a Rochester site.
Oh, okay. I knew
I
about Toronto, but I didn't know.
or maybe that wasn't, or maybe I think TF Michael might be in Rochester. Maybe they're in Toronto, but I know they were saying they're getting some public IPs in Canada.
Yep,
I
sounds
know
about
this
right.
is a technical webinar, but can I ask business related questions too?
This is really just a discussion platform, man. I'm not picky about topic.
Yeah. Um, Last year or sometime, there was a lot of talk on the farm Telegram channel about a real estate project that
Mhm.
Saka uh, was involved with. It's a real estate development, Palisades. I forget the name of it. Palisades
Yeah,
something.
Paradise Hills.
Yeah, I haven't seen any news on that in quite a while. Can, Scott, are you familiar with it by any chance, or can you tell
Yeah,
me? I'm a real estate guy at heart, and I want to bring basically blockchain technology into that industry, which is, you want to talk about, it's as dinosauric as the banking industry. So to get them to change anything that they're doing is very, very difficult. But so I was really excited about that Palisades project because they put a $900 server, the Threefold server in every house that they sold, and that was
yeah,
great. But I was just wondering what happened after that. Did they develop a community? Did anything, like, I could see where they could, like, in another life I managed a high rise office tower on Madison Avenue. And I've told my friends and colleagues here in Pittsburgh that if I had that job today, that building would have its own token. We
Mhm.
had 2,500 employees in that building. We'd have our own currency in that building. It was big enough. And when
hmm
you do the small businesses surrounding it in Manhattan, it would have been a lot of work. But when we were done, we'd have a building that nobody else could compete with in terms of rentals. Everybody would want to be in that building with their business, and
Absolutely.
that's the excitement I see for this technology in that industry, and I just can't seem to get it off the ground, so to speak.
for
So
sure.
anyway, I was interested in the Palisades project to see kind of how that went.
For sure. So I'm not sure how much I can say. I don't work directly on this, but I have been hearing some things. I guess what I will say is that Paradise Hills was really excited to work with us, and then crypto winter happened, And now there's some questions, I guess, is what
Oh,
I
you
can
can see
say.
it. Morale is definitely at an all-time low at Threefold. We got to get rid of that. This is, this is just a little time frame here where things aren't going in the direction we want them to go.
Definitely,
We have to
definitely.
stay with it. I hope the guys that originally did the financing, I mean, I'm not going to cry about my money, a couple grand, whatever, a couple servers. I know some guys have a lot of time and a lot of effort in this. It's a hell of a project. It's mountainous. It's huge.
So I want to jump in.
It's
I
it's
want
going
to
to take time.
I want to tell you a little bit about kind of the concept of real estate development with Threefold and setting up servers like that, right? So everything you just said about, a high-rise building, like, let's take a big city like New York, you've got thousands of residents. Obviously, you've got huge demand within that population, especially in a city center, where that building's going to have a networking infrastructure, right?
Mhm.
And those people are going to want to host things, and that's something that's a challenge oftentimes in small, especially rental communities. Is let's take a high rise for example. They might bring in a couple wholesale fiber lines, and you might only get an internet connection by NAT, so you may not have control of your routers, all that kind of stuff. But what Threefold can allow a landlord to do is to take and really capitalize on things that are available in the residential market. So like in my case, I have a 5 gigabit symmetrical fiber line connection with 128 IP addresses, and I get unlimited bandwidth on that connection. I'm completely unmetered, which is just not something that you're going to get for a reasonable price in a commercial environment. I'm cool with sharing it. I only pay $230 a month for my entire connection, the entire
Wow.
public block, the entire 5 gigabits, like all of it. And I can bring in a second 5 gigabit connection that's on a different fiber network for about the same price. Now their IPs are $15 a pop, so that's a little bit bigger of a project. But
Yep.
with that being said, so if I were to be a landlord here in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, almost every property I owned would have the capacity to host 128 IP addresses and 5 gigabits of traffic unmetered on the grid
Yeah.
for about $250 a month. Now, let's talk about that a little further. I now have a 5 gigabit connection in every house I own, and my renters now have that as a benefit, right? And
Mhm.
then you can take that a step further and you can tell your renters, I also now have these nodes on this Threefold grid network where you're going to be able to host things with public IP addresses in that. And if you host it on the node that I'm running in your house, you know exactly where that data is being stored.
Mhm.
So it all kind of falls into that concept of digital sovereignty and independence. Because really what you're looking to get into is where everybody has essentially a server rack in their home, because we're getting to the point where the cloud is becoming too big, right? The centralized cloud. AWS has to keep expanding all this, right? But we're getting to the point where, a single household may need an entire rack of server space in the near future just to run the things that are related to them. You talk about YouTube with the 4K video streaming and the crazy amounts of resources and storage that are going into having that stuff centralized. We're moving to an environment where we don't have the capacity and centralized structure to actually adapt to being able to provide a centralized pool of resources that actually allows for everyone in the market to have everything they need. So that's where this concept of decentralization comes in. But the problem is not everyone in the world is familiar enough with managing this to be able to set up an ESXi server in their house that can run multiple VMs and then manage all of that, manage your network connection, manage your switches, everything like that. So again, just like Mastodon is a set of tools that have been put together to allow you to host a website that does social media, the Threefold Grid is a set of tools that's been put together to allow everyone to be their own system admin of a miniature DC within their own home.
Mhm.
So
Returning,
go ahead.
returning maybe just briefly to the Paradise Hills model, which we still think is very promising, right? And we're still working on other potential deals according to the same model. Now, this idea is that the housing development essentially has a supercomputer that is built into it, right? One unit, one node at a time. So like Drew was saying, this gives the people that live there access and they'll be connected through very fast fiber within the complex itself, right? So, imagine that your cloud is built into your neighborhood and you're connected to everyone in that neighborhood with direct fiber lines that are super, super fast. And then the other piece of this is that the person that buys the home, they're not just buying the node, but they're actually buying a certain amount of TFT, some of which will be farmed by those nodes, and some of which might also be bought off the market, like in a smart way, right? Because liquidity is low enough right now that if you come in and try to buy enough TFT to split them among everyone in a housing complex, you might drive up the price quite a lot, right? So this is part of our Inca concept, which is a way to buy larger amounts of TFT, future TFT. So Inca is a token that generates so much TFT per month for, I believe, like a 5-year block or something like this. So that the people are getting Inca too, which is a way to buy TFT that is then either farmed or purchased off the market in increments, right? So the price is able to recover from the liquidity, from purchasing with low liquidity. And according to some simulations that we've done, if the price of TFT does well, these folks could have their homes entirely paid for by the TFT that they earn and have bought as part of their unit. So the model's very cool, and we believe that it's still super promising, and we think that we'll have potentially other developers or other projects that are interested in doing this. It may take until things turn around a bit in the larger market or with TFT. But I think, and to Drew's point, Threefold is in one way a response to the massive anticipated demand for cloud capacity within existing internet users and within almost half the planet that's not connected yet, right? So when we talk about the potential value of TFT, it's buying the ability to purchase internet capacity at some point in the future. And if you think that there's going to be a strong demand for internet capacity in the future, then I think it's easy to see how a token that allows you to buy that would have value in that future with all of this demand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, we have to figure out use cases like like the Palisades project. Those IP addresses that Drew has, I mean, that's all well and good. I have a guy I work with that builds websites, and he sells to small businesses.
Yeah.
I keep trying to get him interested in Threefold.
Okay.
And he keeps saying, well, what, like he sells to a local bakery, right? He does their website. He says, what they accept US dollars. Nobody in Western Pennsylvania right now even thinks about using Bitcoin. I mean, there's like one ATM machine within 50 miles of where I'm at.
Yeah.
Because the US dollar is king right now. But
yeah, absolutely.
So I try to convince these business owners, look, this thing is losing its purchasing power. They're going to print 20% more of that money this year. That all is going to come home to roost someday. They can't just keep kicking it down the road. So the web designer, his name's Mark. Mark always says to me, but how can they, this is like a fire hose of information. These guys know how to bake bread. They know how to make donuts, great cookies and pies. How do you take all this technology and bring it to them in a simple enough manner that they'll say, yeah, I want to do that for my business? That's the
okay. So
we can't get through that. him and I.
So let's take Mark for example.
Yeah,
You know, at some point in Mark's supply chain is a hosting provider. So he's storing the files for that website, and he is getting cores and internet connection from somewhere, right?
yes,
So that's kind of where Threefold could come into his business. So the question that you have to, the way that you can propose that to someone like this is, you know, it would allow him to step away from using something like AWS or, you know, hosting a co-located server or something like that. I think, you know, a great way to onboard someone to the idea that grid would be temporary surge capacity. So, you know, I think a lot of people are going to be hesitant to move their critical infrastructure to the grid right away because there's not a lot of proven use cases where we can say, you know, that this is all, you know, just, you know, personally, I think it's all pretty stable, but I don't have a good way to be like, look, this has been up for 10 years and it's a super successful website. Like that stuff doesn't exist yet.
right,
But with that being said, I think what we can propose to them is, you know, like, so let's say Mark gets a request and, you know, something like Mastodon, you know, that rush that came through with Mastodon. It's likely that he could have experienced a time where, you know, there was like 10, 15, you know, 30 people that wanted to deploy Mastodon servers and were looking for someone that knows how to do that and take care of it for them. So what something like Threefold can do is allow Mark to use, you know, his own TFT to deploy those workloads and make them available for his customers, and then he can take payment in the same USD that the customers are familiar with. So just in the same way that, you know, when he deploys a website for customer X doesn't pay Amazon for the hosting, they pay Mark for the hosting. And then
mhm,
Mark pays, you know, his hosting provider. Well, that's
right,
what Threefold is. Threefold is the hosting provider. So we're providing, so, you know, this is something where, you know, Mark could do something where even like, say he wants to, you know, rent a dedicated node. You can get some serious power on the grid on a dedicated node for pretty affordable. I think when I looked up how much it would cost me for my 32 core server with like 256 of RAM, it was like 133. I don't have a calculator up, but it was under $200 a month. So then he could have it set up so that he backs up all of his AWS deployments and all of that to this dedicated node that's just storing his files, and he can use that as a secondary backup that's going to cost a lot less than, you know, a similar node on AWS. So, you know, you can oftentimes get these people onboarded and get them introduced to the idea of Threefold by introducing it as a tool as part of their toolbox and not trying to get people to, you know, move all of their critical infrastructure, this whole idea of decentralization all at once. But be like, hey, set up one workload with Ubuntu with some tools you're familiar with. You know, if he's running websites, he's probably familiar with databases. You know, so you invite, you know, something like that. You don't invite somebody, hey, let's deploy your customers' workloads here. That's a scary concept, right? Because then they're relying on us to be their customer service provider. But what you can do is say, hey, you know, let's get you introduced. Let's set up a PostgreSQL database, and let's have you run a backups and back up one of your databases to the grid, and then save that backup for a month. And you know, that those kind of ideas and the small introductions are what's really going to get people introduced to the concept. Because the
mhm,
problem is the technology here is not different in a lot of ways. You know, hosting a website is still hosting a website. It's just where you're getting your capacity from and who the hosting provider is that changes. So a lot of the same functionalities, you know, it's the same stuff. There's just a layer of unfamiliarity that's hard to get through sometimes.
okay,
Robert, I
interesting.
saw you pop in. Welcome.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. I'm still working hard. Thanks.
How are things in the Netherlands?
Pretty busy. I get good, wet, and getting colder. And but I don't think that's part of the answer you're looking for.
Oh man, it was ice cold yesterday. I had a good inch of little ice thicket on my truck yesterday, and when I woke up, you know, 5 minutes before I had to leave for work. So I feel you.
Okay, then we're better off. Sorry. Yeah, I'm actually. What happened today is I just came back from my first podcast. Podcast? How do you say it in English? Podcast.
Yeah.
And I think I showed you guys that last week we had an interview in a local newspaper. And one day later, the newspaper actually called me and say, hey, we're also doing podcasts and we're really interested and would you want to do that? So that was my first. So that's what we did this afternoon. I drove all the way to Amsterdam and just, to experience what it's like. And it was a great experience. I met the whole crew from the newspaper, which brings me to what you guys were just talking about, because I don't know if I told you what the newspaper is called. It's what they called the andere kant, which is literally translated something like the other side, where they make, there's krant, which is newspaper, and kant is side. There's only one letter difference. So they joke with the words and say it's the other side and mean the other newspaper. So they show, let's say, what not usually gets in the normal mainstream media newspapers. And so it's a bit of an alternative paper, but they're growing fast. And you'll find that group of readers is actually those ones that are really interested in projects like Threefold and decentralization and getting away from big tech. Yeah? So
Absolutely.
I'm using that a little bit to get some leverage over here. And so I decided to do this podcast, and they have a few thousand listeners. They told me it'll be out this Wednesday, I think they told me. And just as we are sitting here, I told him I was going to send him some pictures to help the story that we talked about today, because I think they're also going to post it on YouTube, and they can show some images, even though it was not recorded by video, but they can at least show something. So I'll send it to them in a minute. But speaking to the crew, before we had the podcast, the owner of the paper was there. I met him before in one of the meetings, one of the presentations we had, and he was like, and I saw this one coming. He said, this would actually be really good for us to run as a business on, first of all, we have something used to talk about. And I say, yeah, definitely. It's good for both sides. I mean, we need utilization, and you guys need to show that, we can do things different. And so they're really into that. And I'm fairly sure that within the next few days, I'll get in touch with their IT guy. But on the way back home, I was thinking about this. And to be quite honest, even though I come from a background of web hosting, we talked about this before, Drew, but I'm more of the, the user of the direct admin software. I mean, if I run into trouble, then I would call the guys in the data center and say, help me out here. Well, right now, I don't have anyone to call. So you see my hesitation. I think what I'm saying is I lack the confidence / experience to talk to companies like that and say, yes, I mean, I can deploy a VM and say, go ahead and test this, but what happens if they need a backup? And what happens if they, there's so much territory that I haven't touched yet. So that is one of my challenges. And I was just thinking if that is something that we could set up also as a community, if there are maybe a couple of guys we can come together and say, we're going to make sure that whatever customer joins any of our parties has support from wherever. You understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, so I definitely do, and I think there is stuff in the works for this. I'm not read into the project, but I know that Waynand has mentioned, this new Threefold Grid Services, a kind of a commercial arm that's coming of the Threefold Grid, where we demonstrate kind of how those businesses could function and how they could use stuff, and that's what's going to have the fiat to TFT gateways and everything like that. And I think a lot of that's going to come with it. There's definitely some limitations, though. I think we have to acknowledge the very decentralized aspect of the grid, and that a lot of times, like, let's say somebody, the trouble is the broadness of the topic, right? So we get a customer that says, I'm running this website and I want to make a backup of it. There's always the option of finding a way to literally copy a drive that a VM has and top to bottom and just store it somewhere. But the unfortunate side of that is that's really inefficient. We're literally backing up 100,000 copies of Ubuntu at that point. And realistically, I think what we have to work on is not necessarily teaching people with the idea of, oh, this is how you do that on the grid, but more, this is how you get the grid to the same place you're used to doing that. Because stuff like what you're talking about with like these guys wanting to set up backups, they're going to set up backups in the exact same way they do now on their virtual hosting providers. They're just going to have to deploy their actual VMs and stuff through the grid. So that's something where, like, this newspaper probably has, through AWS or another hosting provider, an offsite backup location. And ultimately,
let me interrupt you there. What they do now is they actually go to a very large hosting provider in the Netherlands that is very well known. So they don't host themselves. I bet they also just lease their VM from them. and they're thinking of doing the same to me. And there's your, when I was just listening to, sorry, I don't know the gentleman's name, CD Creek.
Yeah.
When I was listening.
Chris.
Oh, Chris, hi. We run it. I already took the decision that I'll be more than happy to accept fiat and then, convert it to tokens and just offer them the VMs and I'll pay in tokens. I know there's a barrier there that will take some time for a lot of people to cross, so no problem there. But so I think they might come to me and say, oh, we just messed up something. Can you put back the backup of yesterday? Now, using type web hosting stuff that I have, that was one click away and I could do that, but I don't, obviously we could, you already experienced with direct admin and so we could do the same thing. But I don't know what happens when they want to have cloud environments and there's a lot of other type services. And what I was thinking is, you talked about this Terraform. I still haven't had time to look it up. But I believe there's technologies where backups basically are not really necessary anymore because it's more of a self-healing or self, so that's something that I guess that I would have to get myself into and just become confident that I can manage. I mean, I can manage my neighbor's website, and if it's down, there's no problem. We can bring it up somewhere else tomorrow. But if it's a newspaper, I don't want it to go down. I'll be in the newspaper the next day.
Yeah, so there's definitely limitations. Scott, do you have anything to add on that? I mean,
yeah, so what I see first is there is somewhat of a gap between the raw capacity that's available on the grid and the types of services that most people call them like consumer web hosting services, right? Where you can go to WordPress.com, right? The commercial side of WordPress, and you can get a WordPress site and you enter your credit card information, you click a few buttons, you want backups, you check a box there. And we can certainly do all of that on the grid, but there's a lot more that goes into it, right? You need an environment to run the WordPress. If you want backups, you need to provide that yourself in some way. And these are things that can become easier and more automated. Like we see steps being taken in that direction, like with the mastodon interface that Drew showed off earlier. And in this particular case, maybe it's something like setting up direct admin. I don't have experience with this personally, but more generally what I see is that we're still in a phase of the technology where this is like the early adopter phase, right? People have to want it, and they have to do a bit of work to be able to bridge that gap. And as Drew mentioned, we're working on this commercial service provider side of things, which is a way essentially to show how and show that it's possible for people to come and offer things like Mastodon and like other solutions that we have currently available on the playground. Another one looking at is Jitsi, which is this video conferencing thing. So we're looking at how to build a system where you can, in a simple way, deploy things for customers, bill them in fiat, provide a kind of similar experience to what someone might do, like with the WordPress example I gave.
But this means the customers will come and do it themselves, right? I mean, that takes me out as a let's say in this case as a hosting provider.
You're still the manager, and you're still responsible in the case, right, that they need their backup or that something goes down, and you're still the point of contact, and there's still a business that is, the margin is between what the customer is paying you in fiat and what the grid services cost on the other side.
Okay.
Anyway,
so it's meant for the community. It's not necessarily meant already for the end user.
Yes, for the end user. So we're building it as an example, right, of how people can create businesses on top of the grid. But I wanted to say, I think I got a little bit away from your original question, which is like how, who do you call, right, when things go wrong? And I'd like to think that we have a pretty solid, small but solid community. I mean, Drew and I are both here, and that's a big part of it. But if something comes up, you can come into the grid testers channel, you can post on the forum. Our support team is available for a certain range of requests that come up. If you run into issues, like, I would be more than happy to help you, as soon as the time zones line up or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that said, also, returning to this point where we're in this kind of early adopters phase, and people that want to use the grid or build businesses on top of the grid will need to be able to take a certain amount of responsibility in the spirit of decentralization, right? For being able to roll up their sleeves and learn things and solve problems as they come up. But we would love to see this happen, and we would love to support it to the greatest extent that we can as the team, which of course is stretched thin. And there's, our Threefold team is 90+% developers who are working on building the system. There's only a few of us that are providing support and interfacing with the community. But personally, I'd be happy to help you with any questions that come up here.
That's great.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I just said that's great. I got to jump off, but listen, this is my first time caller, as they say on the talk shows, and it's been an eye opener for me. And Drew, I think it's great that you're taking the initiative like this, and your skills and talents. And Scott, it's just, I bow to your tech expertise, and I learn a lot. And who knows? Let's just keep at it. I think we'll eventually get some business use cases going out there, and we'll look back on these days and remember when, I hope. Anyway,
Absolutely. Good to see you.
Guys. Take care.
Bye-bye, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. And Robert, one thing I just wanted to kind of add on to the conversation is it's looking, a big piece of this puzzle is looking at the target market, right? So we have a product that is designed to allow people to be in complete control of their data. With that, you have to have a customer that wants that. And because that's kind of where we run into a lot of the frustrations is people want to be in complete control of their data, but they also want to have somebody that can step in and control it if they get stuck. And it's kind of a mutually exclusive situation. But that's something where I think these solutions providers come in, and that's the gap we have right now. Is the grid itself is functional and it's working and it's customer ready. We don't have customer ready solutions providers yet, other than Zonaris, who is incredible, and they're doing their thing really well. But that's kind of the model, right? So if we look at Zonaris, their customers, if their workload goes down, they don't reach out to Scott, they don't reach out to me, they don't reach out on the forums. If their workload goes down, they call Zonaris, and Zonaris handles finding the backup that they've kept of that workload and redeploying that on a different node and then getting it right back up.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. This is what I'm looking for, and that's something. And I'm not saying we should use this code for it, but I'll come back to you at some point when these people come and say, okay, this is what we have now. We have a cloud environment, we have a website, and can you host it for us? And then I'll definitely come to you and say, okay, we can start a VM and put it on there. But then what? How do we make sure we have another node somewhere outside of the network where it automatically makes backups? And
yeah, so that's actually you're already on board for that. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, I told you when we redeployed your Mastodon, I had lots of plans with Terraform in that. Mm-hmm. That's where we're going with that. So there's going to be some stuff on that. Basically what it comes down to, and I'm going to go on a small sidebar here, but kind of the project I've been working on that has had me less active in the chats recently is, now that I've learned Terraform, I've been working on setting up ISP config, which is very similar to direct admin. But basically it's got some documentation, and the cool thing is it's an entirely open source software, so we can customize this, build it to the grid, integrate things like Threefold Connect, all that sort of stuff, right? But what it'll allow you to do is it allows you to set up a kind of a network within a network. And so we'll just look at this very first section here. What this talks about is setting up each one of these as a different VM. So you've actually got, mirrored mail servers where all of your mail is automatically copied to the second server. You've got mirrored, name servers where your name servers are split. And what the grid lets you do is take this from where you would typically deploy this in a single environment, kind of like something like ESXi, where they all have different IP addresses, and you're hosting it in the cloud, whatever. But when we do this, we're going to set this up so that you have a name server in Austria, you got a name server in Germany. Your network's resilient. And then we'll basically, and it'll be set up the same way. Our name servers will have public addresses and domain names, but if name server 1 needs to talk to 2, it's going to do it over a private network through WireGuard that we've built on top of the grid. So we're there. I know there's a lot of frustrations at times, but I tell you, we are getting there, bud. And we're going to do some really cool stuff in the near future.
Well, I'll be there to bring it out.
Absolutely.
Oh. Okay. There was one topic, and I've got one that is completely different, and it's just also one of those things that I thought about on the way over here, because we have this Chat GPT stuff, this artificial intelligence. And what is your guys' thought on that? Let me start with that question. Where is it going to go?
Oh man,
That's a good question.
So are you familiar with I don't think I've shown Robert yet, but the Threefold Terraformer script I wrote? It builds Terraform configuration files. So basically I have I think I can actually pull it up here.
But let me tell you where I'm going with this question. They already informed us that it is limited. If you go to Chat GPT, there's certain stuff it won't tell you. There's certain stuff it's not going to predict the future. It's only a database that runs back to, I believe, the end of 2021 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, let's say, I already got worried when I had to use my Microsoft account to log in. Well, I didn't have to, but it was one of the options.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately I started to think like, okay, who are those people that are controlling this thing? Who is going to decide what information they're going to show and not, and teach it what to tell and not to tell? So are there any concerns on that level? And is that something that it may be too big for Threefold to get into, but is there something unbiased coming out as well?
So that is a very large issue. And ChatGPT is owned by a private company. That's it's a centralized resource. They control what they track, they control what they research on, and they train their algorithm basically on what's available on the internet. It stops in 2021 because it ended in 2021, and I think that company's made a very good effort to try to keep ChatGPT safe so that it doesn't tell you how to build bombs and stuff. And that's just something that as technology grows and becomes more decentralized and there's less ability for centralized control, it just comes back down to the individual users and personal responsibility. I think it tracking your data and stuff like that, if you're using a centralized website that goes through any one company, then yeah, your data is up for sale. I mean, there's a lot of privacy agreements and everything else that we see and disclosures of how your data will be used, but ultimately the reality of it is if they want to use your data in ways they don't tell you about, they're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But the grid offers the ability to fix that. So with like ChatGPT is based on a model that I believe it's not open source, I'm pretty sure, but there are open source AI models that could be hosted on the grid. You could host a web service that has your own AI interface that's trained on models you want to host, and you could use the grid's compute power for it. And at that point, you're the only one in control of that data. As for the functionality of ChatGPT, ChatGPT taught me to code in Bash in about 3 days. And I can tell you that in my learning style I can learn topics that I have struggled with for a very long time just talking to ChatGPT about it. So I think it's really freaking cool.
I'm sure. Okay.
There's definitely huge ethical questions around the use of AI. I mean, all the way to the extreme outcome of some hyper intelligent AI that creates some kind of matrix like scenario where all of humankind is enslaved, right? Like that's the kind of stakes that are present when we're talking about AI, and how are we training it, how are we using it, and what kind of resources does it have access to. You know, what happens when this AI gets a hold of someone's credit card or something like this, right? Like and that's one reason I think crypto is really interesting too, and also the threefold grid, right? Because you have, for the first time, like a potential that this AI could, I mean, it could do it with credit cards in the traditional cloud too, right? But crypto is a very compatible form of money for an AI to hold and work with, right? So now you have a grid of resources that an AI that somehow, you know, becomes autonomous, right, can now provision its own capacity if it's able to somehow get a hold of TFT, right? And anyway, you start, like, there's a lot of ways that AI and the threefold grid potentially can interact. I think those are a little more far out, but like what Drew's saying, we do present the possibility that people can take open source AI and run it in a system where the execution is very transparent. That's one of the qualities of the grid. I was talking about this a little bit earlier. It's one of the things that makes the grid special, is that, you know, assuming that the node you're deploying to is actually running an untampered copy of 0s, then the code that you specify to be deployed is actually what's running, and you know that with a high level of certainty. Of course,
Yeah,
I think
and to add, it
most-
would be incredibly difficult to run a modified copy of 0s because it's downloaded at every boot.
yeah, for sure, this would be a tricky thing to do, and the developers are working in some ways to make that more difficult.
I believe that's a big part of the TPM futures functionality, correct? Is making sure that it absolutely cannot be accessed by anything but ZOS.
Definitely, yeah, it's an additional layer of security to,
You know, and I think AI is just going to really change a lot of things. You know, I think one thing that we don't have on the grid yet that or actually I don't know if we have it, because I feel like Zonaris probably does not, someone probably doesn't hang out in front of a computer and deploy 30 workloads in Terraform manually. I'm sure there's probably some automation there, but that's one of the things I've been working on this script to build main.tf files, and kind of my idea with it is to eventually be able to have, so like, you know, like what Robert's talking about, where someone comes to my website and they say, hey, I want to set up a WordPress site. Well, what I want to be able to do is generate a main.tf for that customer site that basically self-deploys, you know. So you got a script that gets an input that says, hey, I want one of VM style 1, generates a main.tf, drops it in a directory and applies it. And then the output gets sent back to the customer by an email. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. So I'll just show you kind of my basic start here. You gotta love the old school, the old school scripted language there. I felt like a kid back in 2011 when the last time I built a script. But yeah, so, you know, something like this just takes that whole process of making these deployments.
I bet you had ChatGPT generated for you, didn't you?
And it makes it so that you can make a multi-node grid deployment, and it just asks you questions. And from there, when you get down to the end, you can tell it what IP addresses you want it to tell you about it. And then all you have to do is do a Terraform apply in the directory it just created that in, and you've deployed a workload. So I think I'm getting pretty close to automating this, but we're working on it. But I think a lot of the things you want to see in the future are also major focuses for everybody. So
cool, great. Okay. One last curious question, but that may be outside of this call. Do you guys know anything about the status of our verse?
the metaverse project.
Yeah, but I get chickenpox when I say the word meta.
oh man, yeah, I feel that.
I haven't heard an update about this for a while, so yeah, that's a good question. This is a kind of a separate team working on this metaverse stuff. I presume that they're still working on it, and we were partnered with them. I don't know if that partnership is ongoing. I didn't hear anything about
That's actually
about
something I've actually never, I don't think I've ever heard of Rverse before, so.
Well, that's interesting because honestly, and I actually mentioned it at the podcast today, and from all the alternatives, I actually highlight that one, and I'm even going to do it again with the information that I'll send them in a minute, because you know, in the next 2-3 years, this whole metaverse, Meta and Apple thing is going to come out huge. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess this year, well, we might already see it coming out this year. And that'll be expensive for a lot of people, but I think in the next 2-3 years that will definitely become the next big thing, I feel. And I have some concerns, the same as we have with the current GayFam crew. You know, Edward Snowden came out with a funny tweet a couple of weeks ago. He said in 5 years' time, Mark Zuckerberg will own your eyes, and every time you blink, he will stop the commercial for a second. So,
Right.
you know, he was, and so that's speaking about alternatives. I'm letting people know that yeah, that's going to come out, but just wait and see. There's our verse coming where that doesn't happen. You know, so I was kind of
Yeah.
curious what I was promising there.
Yeah, so I think, not just in the world of, that specific project, but I think Threefold is really opening up doors to respond to what's happening in the mainstream social media realm. Just as an example, one thing it makes me fume is I use Facebook Marketplace all the time to buy stuff, and I click on local, and out of 6 ads, 4 of them will be internet stores. And I'm just like, what happened to local? Like, and it's become this entire advertising platform for commercial stuff. It's supposed to be the swap meet where I can go buy my neighbor's, garden hose or something like that. And it's so focused on spying on me and putting in ads on there that like all I ever see on the marketplace now is sticks of RAM and SSDs and processors. And I'm like, man, I need a smoker. Like, I don't need a server. Like, I know that's all I ever do on my computer, but I need a smoker. Like,
Well,
but
I use it in my presentations where I take the example, which is a couple of years back already, but there was this case in the States somewhere where this young woman was getting commercial for baby clothes and baby feeding and all that. And then later they found out she was pregnant because big tech already figured that one out by the products she bought, so.
Yeah, so but one thing I think that really the Threefold grid allows you to do is taking something like Mastodon, for example. So you've got the Mastodon team, right? And right now they've built an application that anyone can take and host on any VPS they want and set it up. But what the Threefold grid is it allows you to take it from, and I don't know what I'm doing here, where instead of just the code allowing you to go set up the application, because Threefold Grid is integrated into the infrastructure as code system. So we're talking about, Terraform and stuff like that. I don't know what I just did. All right, sorry, we've got a whiteboard and I don't know why. So instead of just having the code deploy, the PostgRE SQL server and Redis and all of that, these developers can take Terraform and they can build applications that are able to manage their own infrastructure. So that's something where, you could have a desktop application for your customers that say, you build an application for people that want to run a proxy service and they want their own proxy, right? So say I want to be able to click a button on my desktop and I want it to connect to a random 3 node somewhere in the world with a deployed workload, and I want all of my traffic routed through there. So a developer could then build that application so that when you've got your home computer, he can set it up so that all you have to do is enter some mnemonics and then click a button. And whenever you access the internet from that point forward, all of your traffic hits this 3 node in Belgium before it ever sees the internet. And you don't see any function of the back end of the grid. And then when you click that button, it just starts billing you in USD, but your developer has just set it up so that there's an automated deployment of a small VM somewhere in the world, and it proxies to your IP address and you connect to it. So I think that's, the grid really offers a lot of ways for people to respond to not only the overreach by centralized authority, but it also gives the developers that are responding to that a way to make it doable for everybody.
This is kind of the model for the digital twin. We used to call it 3bot in the grid version 2. I don't know if that will ever be resurrected. It's the idea of a virtual system administrator. So this is some code that is running on your behalf, which has the capability to deploy whatever it is that you need in a very simple way. It'll probably look like a chat interface, right? Where you say, hi, my twin, today I want a mastodon server, and you say, oh, okay, sure thing. Do you want a big one or a small one? Do you want an email server, etc. And then it will do that on your behalf with the TFT that are stored in your account, or maybe there'll be some kind of fiat integration. But the main point being that, like as Drew was saying, the base capabilities of the grid enable the creation of very smooth, very automated, as Robert mentioned, self-healing. These are the kinds of things that we plan to build ourselves if someone else doesn't kind of get to it first, right? And where we're at right now is building the base, building a solid foundation to be able to put these sorts of bells and whistles on top, but it's part of the roadmap, and it will take time. That's one thing I know. Everything that we're building will take more time.
If you have to make a guess, I mean, you're still talking about this year, or?
I don't know if I would call that. Being able to conversationally deploy a VM like that is definitely a future goal that I wouldn't put a time frame on.
Okay.
That's, but the idea is that the functionality is there. So like right now, when we set up deployments, I can set up a deployment that monitors all of my deployments and can tell if one of them goes down. And I don't personally have the ability to code this, but it would be possible to code a script that if it detects one of those deployments goes down, it sets up a new server, instructs it to copy from your backup database, and modifies your DNS records. All of that can happen right now. But and the people that need that to happen are the same people that know how to set that up, right? So when you're looking at really, the grid is intended for people that want to move away from having their data hosted by someone else and want to be able to self-host without having to build a data center.
I think the timelines depend on a lot of things. I mean, one is just the general unknown of how long software development will take to build things that are kind of totally new.
It would be cool if you, but just that's out of my own interest, and especially like I said, because I'm using it with my presentations. I've got a small one tomorrow evening for a bunch of, well, it's small. There's about 25 or 30 people tomorrow evening, but that's local, and all of them are business owners. And a few of them were at one of my presentations, but I only got a couple of minutes to talk about it. And they were so interested, they invited me back for a whole evening, which is going to be tomorrow night. But they have a huge network. So that's why I think it's important to go there. And then this Thursday, there's another one where there's a couple of hundred people. But I'm using this hour first as an example, and I'm not telling them when it's going to come, just that it is. So I'm kind of curious if we somehow can find out. I can also ask it in the forum or in the chat or anywhere. I don't know who can tell it. It would be cool to have some idea where they are.
Yeah, I can look into that for sure. We can have it as a question for our community call tomorrow. I don't know how solid of an answer we can get by then. But I'll also say to your point, like how quickly we can deliver things will also depend on how much funding we're able to secure to be able, one, to continue operating at the scale that we are now, and two, to be able to expand the team or support partners in building out these various components. So that's one piece. And then another piece is how the decentralized community grows, right? And who shows up, right, to build these things and build their own kinds of business models or their own ventures, right, that are using the grid as foundational, but taking it, you know, upon themselves to find the funding and build things and create businesses around it, which is, you know, ultimately, like, Threefold is here to demonstrate what's possible. We're not here to create the ultimate manifestations of this technology at massive scale, right? We're here to give the spark. So
That's you know, and a really cool, it's just, you got to have a lot of perspective when it comes to the grid, because I think a lot of times things that we get caught in the trap of expecting the same things we expect from centralized providers. Whereas a lot of times we don't think really so far through it to realize that if we got everything we want of the experience from a centralized provider, we'd end up losing some of the things we want from the experience of being decentralized. So it's a very tough balance. But I think this is a great example. I mean, this is week 5 of this call, and we've just had some great calls, and you know, this isn't a centralized thing. So.
Okay.
Except for the Zoom part.
Yeah, I've thought about that. You just mentioned earlier a technology for video calls that I would be interested in, because I was originally looking at trying to add a Mattermost extension for video calls, and my workload's had an unfortunate event with the delete all button that doesn't have a confirmation on it, so that got kind of paused.
For sure, and no shame for using Zoom. I mean, I use Zoom, I use Google Meet, and we should use the tools that help us get to where we're going. But yeah, Jitsi is what we're looking at for a commercial solution. I've used it before. We actually used it for one of our community calls a while back. They have a free server that you can jump on that's pretty capable. Cool. So yeah,
there's
check out Jitsi.
Little sneak peek, but next week's tech call is actually going to be a multi-platform stream. So we're going to be
we use Jitsi every other week, I believe, with the IT group from Society 4.0, already for a couple of weeks.
Oh, that'd be amazing then. I would love to have another tool that would be familiar with them. So, because that's great. That would actually be a great opportunity. Because I think that's one of the challenges we've had with those guys is teaching them in a familiar environment. So if we can grab a tool they're already used to setting it up and set, yeah, I like this. That's a good idea. I'm gonna make a note about that.
Yeah. Okay, I have to go. I want to finish this thing and then try and keep my wife happy. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'll be around. Thanks very much. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too, sir. Yeah, good to see you, man. All right. Well, Scott, I think it's an hour and a half. I think we're good to close up there.
Yeah, feels like a good stopping point.
All right, man. I appreciate you coming. You have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for putting it on.